Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Chris Province.
And I'm Luke Freeman, and today we're excited because we have our friend, Mr. Chris King, back on the podcast with us. In fact, we're doing a collab podcast. I think this is the first time we've done this.
Gotta look out.
So this is on Magic in the Room, but then it's also going to be on Chris's fabulous new podcast, Stuck in My Head. You want to tell us about that?
Stuck in My Head. My name is Chris King. I'm a licensed therapist. And today, I'm stuck in my head. Let's go. Let's do this.
There we go.
That's what I say that every time.
Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
you said it this time. That's great. Okay, so for Magic in the Room listeners, a little reminder here. If you have listened to other season 4 episodes, you know we're talking about not just leadership this season, but intentional leadership. And what we mean by that is intentional leadership is like noticing something that could be better, making a conscious choice to do something about it, and then having the courage to actually follow through and act and make this world a little bit different than how you found it, and hopefully a little bit better than how you found it. And we spent a whole first month just talking about that, like what is leadership and why do we define it that way? And this whole month we've been talking about, there's kind of more to it than just that, more than just noticing, choosing, and acting, because there's this whole thing under the surface, almost like an iceberg, you know, the 90% of the iceberg's under the surface, and it gives rise to the 10% that's above the surface. And so we've been talking about a lot of that stuff under the surface that drives the choices we make. It really kind of boils down to, like, we have unique personalities. Lots of science is showing that a whole lot of that's genetic. And Chris, as our licensed therapist and mental health expert, is going to tell us if we're right or wrong about that.
Okay.
And then also life experiences. So what have we learned? What have we learned in our childhood? What have we learned in our professional careers that has either served us well or not served us? And how has our brain taken that and sometimes unconsciously driven our kind of above the surface observable behaviors? And so there is a download to help you reflect on this month. So highly encourage everyone, go to magicintheroom.com, get the free download. It'll help you like really interact and hopefully apply these ideas in practical ways. And if you'll remember, last time we talked to Annette Taylor, and she introduced us to her inner cave woman named Claire, who she's made friends with. And we talked all about like kind of our ancestors and what their life was like and the choices that they had to make and what it took to survive, and how we kind of bring a lot of that along with us in modern day. So that's what today's episode is building on.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so debunk us, Chris. Like we're here saying we shouldn't have done that. We should have done this the first episode of this month, not the last, because I really, there's a lot of pressure. Don't invalidate everything we've been talking about. But, this whole idea that our unique personality, the experiences we've had in our life, drive some of this above the surface behaviors, the choices we make, the things we notice in the world, maybe the things that get under our skin or the things that excite us. Like, true, not true? How do you, as a mental health professional who really works with people on this stuff every day, how do you think about that?
Well, I think that I think it's safe to say there's a baseline. Any of us that are parents and have children, and we notice things about them that make them unique from the moment that they're born, and then the way in which they communicate and they do things. We didn't really have much to do with it, and they tend to flesh that out, as they grow into adulthood. And so that can't be like we can't blow that off. It's a real thing. But I think in my world, most of our energy is focused on what happens to you in life and how that impacts your brain, and therefore sort of the ways in which you relate to people around you. So it's a both and. I mean, that's what we've always been told, and in the 2 or 3 decades that I've been doing this kind of thing, like that's just kind of what the deal is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting, when we talk about this in workshops. We say, okay, it's our experiences, the things that have shaped our values or shaped our beliefs. And I think a lot of times the default setting is when we start thinking about what's under the surface, we tend to go to the negative experiences and those keystone moments in our lives that, were traumatic.
Yeah.
And so why is that? Why are we predisposed to think about the negative marks first before we think about the positive experiences that shaped us in other ways?
I mean, because we're built to survive first. And like your last guest was right in the middle of that, right? And that part of our brain tends to be the default, and it wins. And so whenever our brain is developing and when we're young, and it's squishy, and we're kind of open to experiences, and there's inexperience and just the naiveness of childhood, and then things happen that we don't know how to process or navigate, and not just trauma, but like chronically stressful situations, which is what I deal with a lot, right? Is like, if you had parents who maybe weren't clear about how they felt, or about what was going to happen, or about what the status was, how safe our house was. When you're a little kid and you don't know, like you're going to have to cope, and your brain does work to keep you alive. And so, it's the winner. Safety is the winner. But there's a flip side to that too. I mean, like, as we sit around here, like, I mean, I don't know if you guys can think about, I mean, I know you both. I know Luke, I know you really well, I think. And, but think about some of those childhood experiences that were positive, and like, how do they inform the ways in which you see the world today? Like, I don't know if it's as powerful, but like, if we get in touch with it, it's ridiculously powerful. The positive stuff too. I mean, what I do for fun at 54 is what I did for fun at 8.
Yeah.
And if I'm not doing that, which is riding bikes and being outdoors, I feel like something's missing.
Yeah.
I feel connected very deeply, and I even kind of poo-poo people that say, "Oh, I'm not an outdoor person." Like, I believe that everyone is deep down inside, but I don't know if that's true. I think it's just it's so deep inside of me because I spent my time on my own running around the creek bed behind my house.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was the only child, and I had gazillions of hours of free play.
Mm-hmm.
And I was exposed to music and the woods and bikes. I like that. That's what gives me joy, and the important relationships in my life. So I think, to answer your question, Chris, I mean, like, I do think that the negative ones tend to win out because there's survival issues. Like, I say this all the time, like your amygdala, your lower brain, some people say your monkey brain, like it wins because it'll keep you safe. And relationships, be they workplace relationships, familial relationships, friends, lovers, etc., like, those are dangerous things. And so that responsive brain that cares about those negative experiences, it'll keep us alive. It just won't keep us married. I think it's a really important idea. And we have to learn how to let our frontal lobe, like, for short, I do little diagrams with kids. I have Flo and Amy. Amy's the amygdala and Flo is the frontal lobe. And Flo, like, we've got to give Flo voice. We have to slow down enough to let that be a thing. And that's a kind of a behavioral space, right? So
what's happening when we're looking at venturing into uncharted waters, whether as a business or as a leader, or maybe it's just a new interest?
Yeah.
I noticed that my life could be better, or my business could be better if we go in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
But that maybe Amy is saying that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Which is what most people do. I mean, right? Most people are like, well, I mean, that's cool. I envy those people that strike out on their own. I don't know that I could ever do that. Yeah. I mean, that's danger lurking around every corner. I mean, that keeps us alive. That'll keep us safe. But, there's not a lot of adventure in that. And I will say, people so adventurous souls are born, but they're also cultivated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when our brains are young and squishy, that little kid is like, oh, climbing trees is good. I mean, yeah, you could fall, but like, I think I want to do that. And then some adult in your life says, yeah, let's do that, right? And then your course is set. It's just amazing. But that's how that goes.
I love that because I think that's the intent of this entire conversation.
Yeah, right.
Is to say, like, that's not just a kid who wants to climb a tree. Like, that's us.
Yeah.
Right. And like, I hope for listeners, when we talk about intentional leadership, when we talk about noticing something that could be better, and then being intentional and making a choice, it's like cultivating and saying, okay, yes, I see that venture. I see that adventure. I see this thing that I want to do. And sure, there are some voices that are telling me to slow down or stop, but how do I get really intentional about giving flow a chance to work it out? And that's why we say acting is an act of courage. Like at some point, we do have to exercise courage in doing something new. And I think that applies to, like, how do I talk to my boss differently? And
or our spouse or our children.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So I love that. You know, the picture that came to mind for me as you were talking about that story about the adults and the child, like the adult saying, yeah, go for it, to the child is like, I think that happens internally. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if there's a part of me that's like, dude, like, let's go ride my bike, right? Let's go climb that mountain.
Yeah.
There's I'm going to have these voices that are like, well, that's not a good use of my time. That's not practical. Here's how much it costs. But I need to be aware enough to say, well, I think I kind of want to.
Yeah.
So like, Luke, go for it. Like, you're safe. Like, you got it. I'll catch you. Like, you're not dumb. You know, we can always untangle ourselves from this thing, right? Let's put some fail safes in place and we'll be fine. Let's go.
Right. I mean, so down the line, let's talk about internal family systems theory. Like, because you've got these voices inside of you, and some of them are like really positive and helpful, and some of them are stifling, and they're just dudes kind of stuck in time that live there, right?
I want to go back to what you were talking about, Chris, about the kid that wants to climb the tree. Yeah. And we have the parent that the parent either can say, no, don't do that, you'll hurt yourself, or you could fall and break your arm.
Right.
True statement.
Right.
And I think there's probably some number of parents that would respond in that fashion. Or they could say, man, that sounds like fun. Let me do it with you.
Right.
And so now you have the parent as first follower.
Right.
And speaking to, I want to think about this idea of what makes something okay, what gives us the courage and the power of the first follower. How important is it for us to have a syndicate to overcome fear or those obstacles to action?
You're talking about a biological issue almost. Now, can it be replicable? I think so. I mean, my world is ate up with trauma and chronic stress, and how we flesh that out, and how people can grow and heal and grow, right? As a counselor, right? That's the thing I do every day, But, can that happen? Like, is it possible? Yeah. How crazy is it whenever you are in the middle of just schlepping through your day, getting things done, and you're having maybe a rough day, or maybe you're feeling like got a case of the blahs, or maybe you feel a little overwhelmed or burnt out, and someone who you trust says, hey man, how you doing? Like, you got this. Dave Jewett, he coached me for a lot of years, and he used to say, you've got what it takes. And I know if someone was watching that, they would be, that's some super cheesy stuff going on. It wasn't like this older man speaking those words to me. It's like it was like rocket fuel.
It didn't feel cheesy.
No, because I'm on the receiving side of it, and I need that shit, man. It's big. And so, and I don't know if I'm answering your question effectively, but
yeah.
That's what we've got to be able to provide, like corporately, familially, and in in our communities. Like, to me, that's my version of leadership. Like that.
Yeah.
That's how I do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know what that makes me think of, Chris Province, is when we met in grad school. I was at this place career-wise where I had kind of, I'd been shut down on a couple things that I wanted to make happen. And I was like, well, I'm kind of bored. Like, apparently I'm just supposed to show up and do these 5 things
Do
every
what
day.
these people want you to do.
Right.
Right.
And, I don't know. Is that working for me? And then I was like, well, I'll go to school, right? I've been thinking about going to school. I'll go try that. And I show up for the first class. And after a couple hours, I'm just like, I'm not crazy.
Right.
Like, it wasn't weird of me. It wasn't crazy of me to be kind of passionate about some stuff that the people I was around every day weren't passionate about. And that was super encouraging. Like, it rocket fueled, the next 10 years of my life, I think, to have permission to care about the things that I thought was important. And I mean, here we are on, 150 episodes into this podcast where, like, I get to talk about these things that I care about with people who care about similar things. And I don't know that I would have gotten there without intersecting with you, Chris, and other people in that program and feeling validated in that way. So that's just kind of an example, I think, personally to this idea. And then when I turn that internally to what do, I think about, like, as a parent and as a partner and as a team member with people in organizations, do I give that validation and that permission and that rocket fuel, I think is a great term that you used. Do I give it freely and quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I not even notice when someone needs it? So
But you've
I'm going to have to chew on that.
Well, here's what's going to prevent you from doing it is like your lower brain working overtime to protect what you've got or what you think you have or what you're afraid of in the future, And whenever you're taking care of yourself and you can be more present, like you're on your game and it's going to naturally flow out of you in your personality, which takes us back to personality. Like it's going to be a natural flow. Like not everybody is the best encourager. I mean, some people are critical by nature and that can be challenging for others. But like saying you can do it or let's go, I'm in. I mean, man, that's a rock concert, I just went to a great rock. I went to a great show this week and I did take the time, like as I was enjoying one of my favorite bands play, I'm looking around at the room. Like where does that energy come from? Like and I'm going to sound like a terrible therapist now. It's not Rogerian, like wasn't a Carl Rogers idea. Who's the collective unconscious? Well, just like the idea of the collective unconscious, there's this connectedness between us that's spiritual. Like if we'll just slow down enough, and I wonder if that's what's happening whenever in the tree climbing, if that's the adventure. But our brains, we've got to feel safe enough to pull that off. And then to get back to your question from the very beginning of our visit, Chris, my heart rate's a bit elevated right now talking about it. Like I want to do that. And the people that love working with me or for me, like they identify with that, that thing.
Well, and that's the beauty of it. We talk about communities, brands, really high performance organizations. We attract people that believe what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
We attract people we are going to be integrated and contribute to communities that have a similar conscience to ourselves.
Yeah.
Customers.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to attract customers that believe what we believe about the business we're in. If we believe that climbing trees is fun, then we're going to hang out with a bunch of other people who like climbing trees.
Yeah.
And it's what we support and say, you know what? You're perfectly outfitted to climb that tree and do what you want to do. And it's the belief that any sort of better future that we see, we can also make true.
Mm-hmm.
And leaders can really identify and call that out by saying exactly what you said. You're perfectly outfitted for this. You got exactly what it takes.
That's right.
To do the thing you want to do. And it's that lower brain that keeps us from doing the thing.
Yeah, it's because that endeavor's not safe, kids.
Get out of the tree.
It's not,
Yeah.
It is not safe. Why are you up there?
Yeah.
And take it from a guy that's fallen out of a tree.
Right.
That happened to me. I mean, I took a header at like 30 feet, man. I like broke my back. I mean, it was bad. Like, this is a literal part. It's a story. And I don't know how crazy I was, but I went and I did those things again, even after that. And I'm wondering what it is that put that inside of me. Because I'll tell you this, like growing up, how I grew up, out in Northeast Oklahoma, went to little school in Adair, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up and live. But I grew up around a lot of people that were way braver than me. I mean, it was kind of like stupid brave. Like a lot of games with old school 1984 ATVs and mud pits and dodging each other and playing chicken and jumping things on your bike and getting stitches and there were people that were way braver, but I will say that like that the safety that was provided for me, I think about it a lot these days because I see such an absence of it in my daily work. And I do think that like, and this is about, you guys are talking workplace a lot and leadership but the people that are coming into your environments in the workspace that are defensive or insecure or rigid or struggle like that. I mean, I think those people not every time, because sometimes there can be a cost that's too great to bear. But a lot of times those people can be loved and cared for into more adventurous behavior, like the kind of adventurous behavior that benefits the group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I keep coming back to as I'm just listening to you guys and reflecting on this, is that there's a role for ritual and organizational habits in enabling courageous behavior. It popped in my mind because just yesterday I was on site with a client and they were doing their weekly staff meeting. Nice. And I sat in on it. And, we got like halfway into the thing and I found myself speaking up and just like encouraging and forging this team. I'm like, well, afterwards I was like, well, why couldn't I just sit there and listen? Well, it's because it was a staff meeting. And in my mind, like a staff meeting is this recurring ritual of alignment around shared purpose and community building and encouragement of one another and reminders about what we value and why we're all here and why we all showed up in this place and are doing this thing kind of arm in arm. And so like, because I believe that, and I view staff meetings as a tool for community building, I just like slipped into that habit.
Yeah.
And said those things that I hope were helpful. But it just made me think, organizationally, I think we can build those things. When we say, let's do supervisor training, or let's talk about how to coach our employees, or let's talk about how to have an all-team meeting, right? We're really saying, let's learn how to have a ritual that enables alignment and conscious behavior towards shared goals.
Well, that's got to be done on purpose because I thought staff meetings were about tasks.
Well, for some people. No, but
I'm being facetious.
I know, but you're going to make me nerd out about meetings. Like,
yeah, here we go.
Tasks have no purpose.
Providence Chris is just like, oh, thank you. Good night.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Why would you talk about a task that wasn't aligned with your shared purpose?
Well, I think that's why you guys have a business, isn't it?
Right. That's exactly right.
A lot of people's businesses are falling apart because they don't do the thing that counts.
Right. Like why do anything? Like
growing.
Why talk about anything? Why talk about anything if it's not aligned with why we're all here and what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, right.
And like literally it can be like that doorknob's dirty and someone needs to go bleach wipe all the doorknobs. Well, like why? If we don't talk about why are we even having a staff meeting? Should have been an email, right?
Well, okay. So, and Chris, you were teeing it up earlier. You guys were wanting to talk about behavior a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And And you went there just now, Luke. And I do want to say that, I mean, a lot of people that I visit with, at least in my office, I mean, for sure, and we do call some of what we do behavioral health. Like we have an outpatient behavioral health system and offices and all that stuff. But like a lot of people are trapped mentally, right? They're stuck in beliefs and in cognitive or emotional pain or these sorts of things. And some of it's behavior, but these things are all connected, right? But like Chris, what was your angle? Like, what were you looking for when you wanted to talk about the behavior thing?
Yeah, what was the right
Yeah.
answer that Chris was supposed to say?
That's correct. I mean, what do you?
No,
what,
I
what-
was just
what are
kind
you
of getting
curious
around.
about?
I was really getting at the importance of knowing where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how well I understand myself, does that somehow shape where I can go? Like, do I have to know my current orientation to go somewhere?
Yeah,
Oh, you're killing
that
me.
is a good question.
You're killing me here.
Because when we
I
think
can see
about
Chris squirming.
when we think about, and I think there is probably becoming better without that orientation. Maybe that's possible. But when I think about intentional change, it's like this really clear narrative or assessment of my current orientation and current state, and having that clear vision of the better tomorrow. So I know what learning and doing I need to do to close that gap.
I'm going
Yeah.
to make this even harder for you to answer because the metaphor that pops into my mind is like in the wilderness orienteering.
Oh, right, sure.
And I've got a compass and a map. Maybe I don't know where I am, but if I have the right skills, I can triangulate off landmarks and say, okay, here's exactly where I am on the map. And now I know exactly what bearing I need to travel in to get to where I want to go.
Yeah, but
So is that required psychologically for us to improve, or can we just kind of like wander around in the woods and
No.
get somewhere better?
It is required, and your metaphor breaks down because you said if I have the right skills. I'm like, okay, well, what percentage of mankind are you? You know, I mean, that can triangulate that stuff. Like, it's just not common, and particularly if you're talking about people, you know, in our childhood. So like, okay, like orientation, like this is a word I use a lot. So the answer to your question, do we need to know where we are, is psychologically is yes. It aligns with what I think what your beliefs are about like what we're doing in workplace culture and in your jobs, what you guys do. I have a bit, so get ready.
Nice. Lay it
All
on
right,
me.
you
I
ready?
love bits.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the bit. All right. So people, I'll say this, and for the therapists that are out there listening, like I truly am probably the third or fourth best therapist in my building. Like if you want somebody great, I've got some people. If you want somebody good, you got me. And I wear that on my sleeve as a connector, and I'm being self-deprecating, but like, you know, I'm okay if there's people that are better than me. And here's why I say that. And this is the bit, is in ACT therapy, there's like 6 primary needs that they say that human beings have. And all philosophies and like psychological theories, things like that. Everyone who have over millennia have said, I think this is what people need, right? And the guys that came out with acceptance commitment therapy, which is sort of the genre that I enjoy working in, say there's 6. I did not memorize those 6. I got 3. So we're going to work with the 3, which makes me like third. If I memorize the 6, like this weekend, I might be moving up a notch.
We could make you a poster.
That would be helpful. And that organizational space that you guys provide, like, man, I'm really glad I know you guys. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyway, here are the 3. Okay. All right. One is connection, like between people. One is competency, the need to feel good. But the one that I love giving energy to is orientation. And ACT therapy says that this is a core human need. And I ask people this maybe daily, if not for sure a couple times a week, 3 times a week, is, hey, what would it be like in your life if I said, if you looked at your phone and it showed you all these, locations and markers and there was no blue dot? You were not familiar with what the street sign said or which way was north, and you didn't have a "you are here" legend available to you. And I want us to imagine what it's like. And those of you that are listening, like you might say, that was me. I mean, when you're a kid growing up and you don't have clear communication about where you stand with people, that's why when someone says you've got what it takes, I'm like, oh, thank you. I needed to hear that. Oh, this is where I'm at least according to you, and I trust you. Like, that's why that's so powerful, because the lack of orientation kicks that lower brain in big time.
Mm-hmm.
And what if that was your life?
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about like foster care, right? Like adoption, attachment. Like these children have this in spades. They're like, who am I and who am I to you? And who was I to that person that I was supposed to belong to? And those questions are go deep in our psyches, and then we work out our adult lives trying to kind of rebound from those questions, and figure them out. And that's why we need those people in our lives to be able to say, this is who you are to me, even when the news is bad. Like you're, we're talking about workplace culture. Like, can we do an evaluation? Would it be better for me to give the bad news? I don't want to give them the bad news. Give them the bad news, please.
Yeah.
They need to know, again, where they're at. Mm-hmm. People got to know that. It gives them some solid ground to work from. They can accept their current position. Oh, this is what's real. This is what's true. I didn't know that. That's challenging. Okay, well, it's way better than living in ambiguity and trying just to protect yourself 24/7.
Well, and that's the hallmark, I think, of low performance anything.
Come on.
With people involved, right? Is I don't have context. I really don't know anything other than the task I'm supposed to do. They told me to sit here and stamp the die or turn the key or process this paperwork. Like, I lack context. I lack connection.
There's no orientation.
I have zero orientation.
Yeah.
So expanding our understanding of orientation. And I think as community, organization, enterprise leaders, thinking about, does every member of our team have proper orientation? Do the people in my family have proper orientation? And then it goes back to who's the steward. This is why senior leader intent is so important, is to say, here's my belief as the senior leader. Here's what I believe we're about as an enterprise. But then, like, do we have the will to do the things necessary to orient everyone in the organization? Because that requires a really intensive and inclusive communications framework and really effective people practices just to create the proper orientation to do high performance work. Without the orientation, I think that lower brain kicks in. We make up the narrative because we're not provided one.
Yeah.
So we're left to guess. It's really not that fulfilling. There's not a lot of joy. And that's where kind of this year's Gallup poll, right? What do I got to pay someone who likes their job to move away from it? 20% more. What do I got to pay for someone that's ambivalent about their job? 0%. Just give them a new environment.
Wow.
Right? So that's powerful, right? And that's really what I want to get at, is like the need for orientation and the type of effort required for me to provide it for myself and for a business leader to provide it for every person in their organization.
Yeah, and I want to give a practical example, because I think this is very powerful, and I want people listening to be able to just apply this practically. So, same staff meeting where I kind of got in my rah mode and they couldn't stay quiet.
Yeah.
Love them, start up, getting things going. The senior leaders are sitting there, and they started delivering this message that was, we're a small team, we're a startup, everyone's got to have each other's back, let's encourage each other. And, we really need to communicate well. And they were saying, let's be good to each other. And again, I interrupted. I was like, and what they mean by that is we have a zero tolerance for no calls, no shows. That's not acceptable in this team. because having each other's back means that unless you're in a car wreck on the way coming here, you probably can at least send a text that you're not going to show up. And that's the expectation. I mean, like, that's orientation.
Yeah.
Right? Just being clear about these are the rules of this place that you're in, not because people like having a bunch of rules, but because we're doing something extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that it's extraordinarily different than some other first-time job setting that you've been in before. So I just want people to hear that. And then, Chris, to go back to when you were saying this lack of orientation, what does it feel like? I just thought about all those times personally when we aren't oriented. And I want people to connect to a time like that and just kind of relive it and experience it, like waiting for some sort of medical screening result.
There you go.
Do I have a disease? Do I not
Right.
have a disease?
Right.
Do I have ADHD?
Right.
I called and left a message with this loved one and I think they're mad at me. They haven't called back. And where do we stand? Like, you can't not think about it. You can't not churn over it and create a narrative in your mind. Yet as leaders, we leave people to do that all the time.
Yeah.
And so, for me, I don't want to get way off on a tangent, but I think it's an act of real care and concern to be able to assuage those kind of churning narrative building thoughts in people by providing that clarity.
That's the old Brene Brown thing, right? Clarity is kindness. On our podcast, I think it was just the last one we did. We had Dustin Stager on, who wrote a book called Blame This Book. And it was just about the uselessness of blaming and shaming in the workplace. Like, that's his whole thing. And I'm like, you want to talk about a lack of orientation. I mean, like, when people are operating out of their lower brains because they feel threatened and fearful, again, not weird, just not helpful. Common, but it's not going to get you what you want. And the people that are on the receiving end of that, I mean, they might actually be really oriented. That's just false.
Yeah.
They
Well,
might believe the wrong things, and that's anyway.
well, and speaking of unhelpful relative to orientation, what about just intentionally misorienting someone through something like a performance evaluation?
Come on.
Right? So, Luke, you have 100 people in your organization. We use this little 5-point scale. You can issue, 5 5s and 15 4s, but you really need to issue like 80 3s.
People,
Right.
I'm asking, people do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or like you can do whatever you want as long as you.
Because not everyone's great.
I get it. Okay.
Right. So
Right,
you can't
right.
have all 5s. That's not reality.
Got
There
it.
have to be some top performers, and we as senior management need to know who those top performers are.
Got it.
So you have to sit there and tell 80 people that they're 3s.
Which means something different to all of them, but
Yeah.
three.
And you have to have 15 2s and 5 1s.
Wow.
So figure out how you're going to distribute this among your people. But those are the numbers.
Well, here's some orientation for that middle manager, which is just like, my opinion doesn't matter. I mean, you know what I mean? So I think that our clarity and us taking those relational risks, which basically means like, here's what I think, here's what I feel. Like, I'm not saying that every business has to be therapy central. I mean, that's not my point, but I think that clarity where that inside stuff can like make it to you. You know why it's good to say what you want? It's actually, and this is an interesting conversation, I think, which I have, again, a lot of these. Here's one reason why it's really good to say what you want, because it's orienting. Mm-hmm. It might get me what I want, but I know, one thing it will do, one thing it is the truth, even if what I want isn't that good for me. If I tell you what I want, at least I'm telling you the truth. And then if I say I don't want that, I love that. I ask people all the time, like, why do we not say what we want more in our marriage or in our workplace or with our kids? And people tell me all the time, and they're the things that I would have said. I'm like, well, I mean, I don't want people to say no, or I don't want them to think a thing or whatever. I'm like, okay, but understand what you're giving up. If they can know you or understand you, the seeds for trust are like getting cultivated there. So that orientation, man, I'm kind of pumped. It's a big deal.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole, like, why you have a purpose, why you have commitments, why you have values. Like, what are you orienting your day to?
Yeah.
What are you orienting your career to? What are you orienting your existence to?
Yeah.
But
Well, you could say that getting clear about your purpose is going through an exercise of identifying what you want.
Sure.
Absolutely.
100%.
So, I think there's a lot of parallels.
Well, and I think you hear all the woo-woo manifesting stuff. Well,
Yeah.
it would make sense that things come more true as you orient yourself in the direction of the things you want.
Yeah, it's not magic.
Yeah.
By the way, this podcast, now that's magic. I just want to toss that in there.
In the room.
In the room. But it's not magic. You're just casting a wider net and you're moving in a direction. That stuff's going to happen, at least at some level,
Yeah.
Jeez.
So I do want to get practical here. So going back to intentional leadership, noticing that something could be better, choosing how you're going to interact with it, what you're going to do to change it, and then having the courage to act. If it's true that our experiences and personality really set the direction for what we notice and the choices we make, how do we orient ourselves more clearly around what parts of my personality are driving me that maybe I'm not realizing, or what experiences are really dictating what I'm noticing about the world and what I believe to be true about the world, or what bugs me about the world? How do I identify what those are? Maybe some of those things that doesn't come easy to identify. Does that question make sense?
Not a lot, no.
Well, let me say it this way. I'll use the iceberg metaphor. How do so if I was a scuba diver, right, out, and I came upon an iceberg in the ocean, I could see the top of it.
Yeah.
And then I would put on my gear and I would dive down, and with practice, I could dive deep, and with a flashlight, I could really check it out and get to know the nooks and crannies. And I could, by going under the surface, I could understand what it was that was really buoying up what was above the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we do that individually?
Sheesh. I mean, who does that individually?
I do.
Well, I think that's what we're asking
who
people
does
to
that?
do.
Leaders
Right?
do.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Really effective people do.
I understand that. But I'm like, I don't meet those people very often, like that are like, hey,
They've all been to therapy.
But you're
Help-
like the
help-
outfitter, aren't you? Aren't
Yeah.
you like giving them their fins and their mask and their flashlight and saying, here's how you use your, whatever the thing's called on an oxygen tank regulator. I got there eventually.
Nice.
Here's how you use your regulator, right? Isn't that kind of what you're doing? And like, what are those things? It's not a regulator and fins, but like, what is it?
Yeah, yeah. I think that, I mean, the people, and again, I'm talking about my practice that I work with. Like, people have to get past there, and it's so difficult because it's a biological, physiological space where folks are protective. They're fighting and flighting and freezing in their lives, and it damages their relationships. And so they have not learned how to be present enough to understand themselves or to have the courage to ask for feedback from the people that can give it in a way that is tangible and that matters and that is honest. And amen, good leaders do that. And that's why, that's why they're good leaders. It's chicken and egg. Right? Like I don't know who taught that person to do that, or if it was just like, you know what, I'm not afraid to get the bad news about me because that makes me better. I want to know. And I'll say this, at least culturally, like, who does it? It's who takes the time to get with the people that matter most and say, help me be better. And what would our lives be like in our families and our institutions? Good night. You think like politically, like, have we ever heard anyone publicly say something like that? In a way that had teeth? I want that. And here's the beauty of leadership, like for those of us that run companies, small businesses, mid-size, whatever, right? Like we get to choose that.
Yeah.
That's ridiculously powerful. There is no rule that says that we don't do that. Like, and how effective and how ridiculously powerful can that be? I mean, we as a team, my team, y'all's team, can make a difference when leaders do that stuff. But I do think it's about slowing down enough
There you go.
to be present. Presence. Eckhart Tolle said, he has this wild idea. He says the past is not a thing. It does not exist. All that exists is now. And people, I kind of look at me weird when I say that. I'm like, well, where does the past come from, by the way? I know we if we don't, those that don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. I'm like, I get all that. I'm like, but where does it come from? Where is the past and the future, for that matter? And folks that are kind of leaning in a little bit, they get it pretty quickly. They'll say, yeah, I guess that's in my brain, right? I'm like, yeah, come on. But now, what about now? And when people can do that, like the rules change. I'm not worried about what happened back then or what might happen. I can do now. And right now, what would be helpful is for me to get some honest feedback from you. Tell me, because I just want you to know that I'm not threatened by it. Dude, talk about power. That would be powerful.
Yeah.
And that's this idea of like working in hypotheticals.
Come on.
There's these well, what if? What if this happens and what if that happens? And yeah, what if? I don't know. That's tomorrow's deal.
Yeah.
Right? I'll worry about that thing tomorrow.
Yeah.
But like I think dealing in hypotheticals is a huge emotional lift and a complete waste.
People forecast for a reason. I mean, like, and there's experience and all that kind of stuff. But I would just say that, like, emotionally and for how our brains work, if we can learn how to not just use the hammer to build the whole house, right? Like, if we're not in problem solving mode 24/7, if we can slow down and do now, that changes things. And so that ability to give and receive honest feedback to where we ourselves have an opportunity to grow because someone that actually knows us tells us the truth.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to try and get really practical here. Any research psychologist, lots of people who are kind of in the psychometric world, right? We often laugh off things like Myers-Briggs and DISC and Enneagram and things like that. But I do find that they are orienting tools, because until I say, well, I'm an introvert. Okay, I'll look at myself through that lens, which may or may not be true. That one's probably more true since it's one of the big five. But once I look at myself through that lens, then I have the choice in this moment. Am I going to do that, or am I going to be more extroverted? And so only when I really do kind of stop and take stock of myself and get that feedback, whether it's through an online quiz, right? I can do a BuzzFeed, which Disney princess am I? Right. Or whatever. Or I can ask a trusted colleague, hey, tell me some things that are strengths and weaknesses. But until I do that and get some sort of feedback, it is very difficult to make a conscious choice about doing things differently.
That's because you're bobbing and weaving. Like good coaches always say this, right? You would listen to, if you're a sports fan, the good coach would always give you the same old line. Well, what do you think about next week's opponent? And they'll say, well, we need to play our game. They're outstanding, but we got to play our game. Because you know your game. And okay, fine, prepare, but truly, I mean, like without that orientation, like and like people are bobbing and weaving. And so yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we need to get to wrap up here pretty quick. Let's end with this. We didn't start with an icebreaker, so let's kind of end with this one. When is a time that you increased your orientation? You learned something true about where you were that you didn't know before, and what difference did it make?
Well, I just went through I just did this week. I took a little break last weekend.
San
And
Diego, baby.
yeah, it was nice.
Awesome.
Really started like just thinking about well-being, right? And there's so many different domains of well-being, and thinking about, well, everybody wants to be well, but not many people are willing to do the work to be well.
Right.
Or they don't know what work to do. Maybe they're willing and don't know the direction. Maybe they lack orientation. But, as we've talked before, like there's this all the idea, like if I want to be well in a particular domain, I have to do the work of that domain. Emotional well-being requires emotional labor. Physical well-being requires physical labor. Intellectual well-being requires intellectual labor, spiritual well-being, etc. I think those 4 domains are really powerful for leadership effectiveness. So of all the domains of well-being, those are the ones I like to hone in on. And just the process of checking in with myself to create that quiet space and be present and say, how am I doing physically?
Mm-hmm.
How am I doing intellectually? How am I doing spiritually? How am I doing emotionally? What do I need to keep doing that's giving me vibrance in that domain? What do I need to stop doing that's discounting my performance? What do I need to start doing that I can project would increase my well-being? But I've got to be able to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So by slowing down and being present and assessing and orienting where I'm at relative to those domains, I then know what work to do and can go about actioning that. So, I mean, there's probably the most, just happens to be a recent example. If you would ask me a month ago, I wouldn't have such a recent example. But and I wrote an article coming out of that exercise that we'll put on the website to be downloaded. So if you guys want to check that out, but I really, Nassim Taleb really speaks to anti-fragility, and it's more than resilience. It's being better because of suffering. Like when I face adversity, I am better because of it. I eat it like a protein. I don't just snap back to my previous form. And I like, I'm trying to work towards that type of person. So creating that space, I hope, moves me towards that as I pick up the shovel and go do the labor within the domains.
Yeah.
I thought of like 3 things, and I love hearing my voice. And I could, and one of them was on purpose though. Well, Chris, with your thing too, I think about like these purposeful things about like, that means quiet times and journaling and personal retreats and time in the schedule to like do those things like on purpose. The thing that was on purpose that was reorienting to me was when I was 22, I realized that I could do whatever I wanted. So I went to Australia. I didn't know anybody on the continent, and I just went there. I worked out a job on the phone because there was no internet in 1992. And they paid me to teach rock climbing and rappelling at this little camp on a saltwater bay just south of Sydney. And so then I didn't know what was going to happen to me, but I was super excited for the adventure of it. And I seriously knew no one. So I saved up my money by living at New Life Ranch at the camp, and I would eat the weekend's leftovers all week long and mow grass for all fall. And I would drive over to Fayetteville and hang out with my girlfriend, Kristen, who then I married, and that was 30 years ago, right? So January I'm going to go, and I'm saving up my money. The flight cost me $1,300. I have like $1,500 in the bank account. And so I buy the plane ticket, and I go and I fly. I hop over to New Zealand. I get to Australia. I'd never been out of the United States. And my adventure was rewarded because when I stood by this rock and looked at the ocean like a guy met me with the sign, right? Chris King. And
In a limo.
No.
And did he have a Crocodile Dundee knife or?
It actually was Paul Hogan. It was Crocodile Dundee
okay,
because he was doubling as a pre-Uber driver. And so I got to the camp, and I'm like jet lagged, and I walk out and I look at the ocean. There's this little rock that says, "Be still and know that I'm God." And I looked around and I'm like, I'm upside down on the earth. And from the next 2 weeks, everything sounded different. I heard birds in the woods that did not exist, and people obviously spoke differently, and nothing was the same. And it was all wonderful. It wasn't nothing is the same. It was like this knife's edge of ambiguity and fear versus curiosity and adventure. And I was on that side.
Yeah.
And I chose it. And it made me feel small and part of something wonderful. And it changed my life. And I stayed there for 3 months. And then I came back and I worked at camp and got engaged and finished up my life. And I might have gone back there, but then New Life offered me a job. And so I stayed there and ran a camp. So that was one I did on purpose. One that I didn't do on purpose that was very orienting to me was that I started a nonprofit after I did some church work and just was super naive about what would make a nonprofit work. I mean, I knew how to run a program, and my program was a great idea, and everybody that did it, all 8 of us, thought it was amazing. And I ran out of money like super quick. And then I'm like, oh, this is not working. I got to find, this is not, things don't work just because I think they're gonna. And so when it came time for me, and so a friend of mine said, being a therapist, you do have that master's degree, like you could do that. I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And so I reluctantly got into that. But as I went in and created my own business, I mean, you guys will laugh at this, but making a profit was not on my priority list, at all. I wasn't worried about it. But it was a real problem. And so that failure reoriented me.
Yeah.
The thing that I started and that I advertised and that I was really excited about did not work. Mm. And therefore the thing that I'm doing now has been informed by it.
Yeah.
So I do things a little differently. Yeah. I know what I didn't know before.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Man, that knife's edge.
Yeah.
Fear versus curiosity. Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
It's like the performance zone.
Yeah, it is. It is.
You got one?
Yeah, I got one. I don't think this will be surprising to you guys. I don't know if I've ever told this story on the podcast, but it was a pretty pivotal moment for me. I was at a conference in Colorado Springs at the there's a fancy hotel there, has beautiful art in
Broadmoor.
The Broadmoor, thank you. I was going to say Biltmore, and that wasn't right. So the Broadmoor. And I stayed an extra day afterwards. This was in December, and there hadn't been any snow really yet for the season. And I was like, I think I can go hike Pikes Peak. And so if you've never, there's a couple ways up Pikes Peak, a few ways. You can drive up, although the road is closed in the winter, and it was closed in this December. There's essentially a giant stairway up the east slope that you can go up that kind of follows a cog rail path. And then there's a trail that I really like on the backside. So you kind of go to the west, kind of southwest side of the mountain, and it takes you a while. You have to drive all the way around the base of the mountain from Colorado Springs and park and hike up. And no one in the parking lot, no one else hiking that day. And I got up above tree line, and it's a 14,000 foot mountain. And
you're by yourself, right?
Yeah, by myself. Yeah. And it was cold. Once I got up above tree line and the wind was blowing, it was really cold. Mm-hmm. And I just kept going. And when I got to the top, there's Pikes Peak is one of the few 14,000 foot mountains that you can drive to the top of. So it has a little visitor center and things like that. Well, it was all locked up, of course. But I kind of got down in sort of the lee of one of these buildings and tried to eat my lunch. And I couldn't even really take my gloves off because I was so shaky, just and cold, my body was just really pushed to the limit. And then I struggled getting down. And usually when you climb something like that, the descent is pretty easy and fast. It's hard when you get up to kind of thin atmosphere, going that last 1,500 feet of a tall mountain is difficult. But usually you turn around and you're really fine. But I was not. I eventually got back down, and once I got down and got warmed up, I was okay, and went back to the hotel, to the Broadmoor, and got in a jacuzzi and like warmed up and everything. But I've had a few instances. I almost got heat stroke one time on a hike as well, but that time and then this one were really the times that I was probably closest to actually being in danger and hurting myself. So, the next day I'm driving back across, I took 412, from Raton, all the way across the panhandle of Oklahoma again. So I'm just kind of out in the middle of nowhere, driving home and just thinking about like, why do I push myself to the limit? And I was doing the same thing career-wise. I was just in sort of this impossible situation that I was trying so hard to do the right thing, to do what I thought was right, to find a solution that would make everyone happy. And 6 months later, I resigned from the job that I was in. And that drive across, the plains after that experience where I got myself in real trouble, I remember as just kind of this orienting moment of like, I don't probably like, it took me a while, maybe I'm a slow learner, but it was the beginning of that. Do I really have to push myself in this way? Mm-hmm. Do I really have to turn myself inside out to reach some sort of idealistic goal or vision of what I think I need? Like, do I have to get to the summit, even if it's unhealthy and unsafe? And it was the beginning of some different decisions and what I did with my life. And so, very orienting. And obviously, like that's something that I reflect on pretty often. Like, do I need to be doing what I'm doing right now? Am I doing it because I want to, or because I think I'm supposed to? And that's an orienting decision that I have to reflect on pretty often.
Well, the word you use there over and over is reflect. And I just think about in our old, we know how to use a map and a compass. That was a thing we kind of into back when you needed it, I guess. But the old trick is like whenever people can believe they're oriented, but if they never stop and get their eyes off that compass, like you can be way the hell off course. I mean, it could be a real problem. And so that idea of like, okay, I'm taking my bearing and I'm looking down at this guy, and then I look and I aim it up to a tree or a cliff, and then I go to that point. Then I'm going to take a moment and do it again. And every one of us were like, I took a moment and I reflected.
Yeah.
Big deal.
And even when you have the compass, you pay attention to more than the compass.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for joining. And I guess,
him too.
you're welcome.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank our guests, Luke Freeman and Chris Province. And this actually was a part of Luke Freeman's mobile studio from one of our therapy rooms. And there's signs that say, you matter and believe in yourself. Be you, guys. Come on.
I don't know who else to be, Chris.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Way to go.
Enjoy the little things.
Beautiful.
Take time to relax.
Come on.
So where people, let's say the Magic in the Room listeners that want to know more about you, Chris, and what you do, how do they find you?
You can find me and my team at chriskingcounseling.com, or you can contact us directly at info at chriskingcounseling.com. And we do therapy in Tulsa, Owasso, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and also in Silent Springs, Arkansas, in the Arkansas area, Northwest Arkansas area. And we try to help people. It's what we do. Love it.
Yeah. And people can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com or magicintheroom.com. Just a reminder, if you're interested in this whole idea of our personality and experiences driving some of our leadership behavior, there is a free download, magicintheroom.com. to help you reflect and apply some of this to yourself. So,
Yeah, and Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Broderud, and Luke Freeman. Produced by Ben West. Our social media management is handled by Emma Holland and Michael Manfredi. And our theme music is by Evan Grimm. Check out all of his music on Apple Music. And this episode was recorded live at Chris King Counseling right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com and check out all the previous episodes at magicintheroom.com. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week.